Welcome to the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. I'm your host, Rick Zamperin. The U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, coordinated attacks to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons and force a regime change in the Middle Eastern nation. Iran has initiated counterattacks against Israel and America's military installations in the region. Hundreds of civilians and soldiers on both sides have already been killed. Oil and gas prices have soared, and Canada's flip-flopping stance on the conflict has been questioned. What happens next, and what impact will it have on Canadians, those in the Middle East and beyond? Dr. Fitz-Gerald is a political science professor and the director of the Balsillie School of International Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University and joins me on Newsmakers. Dr. Fitz-Gerald, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot to unpack over the last couple of weeks. Which developments have really caught your attention?
Well, I think the fact that the problems in the Straits of Hormuz have really choked the global economy and cut off energy supplies, transportation, have forced the United States and turning to its allies in doing so to access strategic oil reserves. I think the other thing that I'm concerned about is the spreading of the conflict. This now just does not concern one conflict between or involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran. It has spilled over to a wider conflict in Lebanon. We're seeing strikes on Beirut, the city of Beirut, the Lebanese capital, that go beyond the normal target of the Dahiya region in the city, which has been known as a Hezbollah stronghold. And that has displaced, as well as in Iran, large movements of refugee flows, which risks, of course, heading towards a larger humanitarian crisis.
Do you think this operation is more about eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities or potential nuclear capabilities, or a regime change in and of itself in Iran?
Well, I think that is the million-dollar question. What is the strategic aim of this conflict? Is it regime change? Is it to degrade the military capability? Is it to degrade the ability for Iran to enrich uranium stockpiles and develop a nuclear capability that could endanger the United States and the North American continent? We've been hearing different discussions on the strategic aims coming from the State Department, coming from the Pentagon, coming from the White House, and there are still many questions being asked, as well as what political ends the allies are trying to achieve in waging this war.
This war was ignited by America's assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Why do you think this is happening now?
Well, I think there's a tight alliance, of course, between the United States and Israel. The reports coming from the Middle East suggest that Israel approached the United States and felt that it would be very helpful to have the U.S. support to wage this attack. Israel has always felt that Iran is responsible for the arc of instability with its links to the proxy groups across the Middle East, and wanted to eliminate this threat and needed the support of the United States. There could be other reasons motivating the White House to take this position at the moment in waging the war, possibly deflection of towards other items on the White House's agenda. The White House has always made it clear that it is committed to peace in the Middle East and to helping eradicate any threat posed to Middle East allies, particularly Israel, as well as the U.S. itself. However, there are mixed reports about the extent to which Iran was getting close to developing a nuclear weapon that could directly threaten the United States. There were also questions as to why, when diplomatic talks had progressed to a certain level, the U.S. decided to partner with Israel in staging this surprise attack. So I think if there wasn't as much of a hostile motive towards the United States and Israel on the part of Iran before the war was launched in late February, there is now, and there is continuity by putting Mojtaba Khomeini, the former Supreme Allied Commander's son, in as the new supreme leader of the country. That motive, that commitment to continuity of the regime, that commitment to supporting the Revolutionary Guard force, which is a prolific force across the country, not to mention the other militia groups and the Special Quds Force. So there's still a lot of capability in the country, although U.S. and Israel, through their strikes on the infrastructure, through the strikes on the missile launchers, have certainly degraded a lot of it.
You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz earlier in our conversation, a waterway that holds a lot of weight in terms of shipping oil reserves to a large part of the world. Iran has fired on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. It has laid sea mines in that waterway. Is that the biggest chip that Iran has to play right now?
I think it is. I mean, one could argue that it would take one drone being launched from Iran to continue this war, one drone on a daily basis to continue the war. And you're seeing that, air supremacy and maritime supremacy alone is not going to win in that region. A complete victory against Iran would necessitate a ground force intervention and seizing the coastline. And it's the coastline that provides a staging base for a lot of the anti-vessel missile firing and the launch pads. And let's not forget, the most narrow part of the Strait of Hormuz is only 21 kilometers. So it's a really, really geostrategic part of the world, but it's a very vulnerable part of that waterway when there is a war being waged in it. So maritime mines, missiles that can be fired in short to medium range, drones, and there's no shortage of drones that are accessible in Iran.
What do you make of Prime Minister Mark Carney's flip-flopping stance on this? He was supportive of the attack initially, now ultimately saying that Canada would never be part of this military operation. What do you make of how the PM has handled this?
Well, I think, as ever, with these foreign policy interventions that the U.S. is becoming involved in, some more aggressively than others around the world, it puts Canada in a very, very difficult position, being so geographically close to the U.S., being a NATO ally of the U.S., and being a very important trade partner of the U.S., and there's obviously an important reciprocal arrangement there too. Our economy really depends on that partnership. So, I think it was a show of support for what the American government was doing, a show of support for the Iranian people. But who would have known that this war would carry on for the weeks that it has done, and that back-channel diplomacy wouldn't have kicked in again and started, especially with pressure from the other Gulf nations who are now being pulled into the war and being struck. I think Canada has to continue. I don't think it's, in fact, it's made very clear through our defense minister that we will not be involved in any offensive action on the ground, but we cannot rule out some sort of supportive involvement, whether that's, and importantly, first and foremost, the evacuation of Canadian nationals in the region. Secondly, some maritime support to our allies. Thirdly, calling for the ongoing protection of civilians and adherence to the rules-based order and the rules on conflict management, which are widely known and should be widely subscribed to by signatory member states. That includes Canada and Canada's allies.
The cost of war is immense, death, destruction, and aside from that, the actual physical cost. The Pentagon recently telling Congress that this war in the first 6 days cost the American military $11.3 billion. That's about $1.9 billion a day. That's not sustainable, isn't it?
It's not sustainable. It's an enormous price to pay at a time when the Supreme Court in the United States has ruled against the continued use of the IEEPA legislation to allow for punitive tariff measures. It's coming at not a good time for the Republican Party and Donald Trump, with the midterm elections approaching, with the price of gas surging and consumer prices surging. Because let's not forget, it's not just oil that travels through that critical geostrategic area of the Straits of Hormuz. There are other products that are being affected as well. So, I think we're heading towards three possible outcomes, the most probable of which is a controlled escalation of the conflict while back-channel diplomacy goes on, possibly helped and supported by countries like Qatar and Oman, and probably the United States itself. We've heard the new Iranian supreme leader speak out this morning, as reported in the Globe and Mail, saying that he would use the Straits of Hormuz as leverage. So I suspect the back-channel diplomacy will continue, but in parallel to that, the U.S. and Israel will continue to try to degrade the military infrastructure, to degrade the military launching points. But we've heard President Trump offer to escort ships through the straits, and that carries too much risk, I suspect, for the United States military to agree to.
How is this playing back home in the U.S. among the general public?
Well, President Trump was in Kentucky yesterday, and the message that he was giving to constituents there was, "We've won," and being quite bellicose and the normal sensationalized rhetoric was coming out about winning the war, being victorious. But do we want to leave yet? No, he cited that he wanted to finish things off. So what that means, we don't know, and how long that will take, we don't know. But he's clearly on the road doing some electioneering in the lead up to the midterm elections. There are pressure coming from Democratic senators, some Republican senators as well, to bring the war to an end. But there are also, as we have seen with other sensitive foreign policy issues since President Trump came into power, many Republican senators that are stepping back and, by way of silence, supporting President Trump's agenda.
With the holdup of oil, if I can put it that way, out of the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions have already been lifted for some nations on Russian oil. What do you make of that? And can Canadian oil become more valuable in this instance?
I think Canadian oil can definitely become more valuable. We are, as we continue to stand for international norms, rules, the laws of armed conflict, the laws of war, Canada is increasingly, particularly relative to the current administration in the United States, seen as a reliable and trusted ally that hosts a very law-abiding society and a law-abiding approach to trade. I see that. Sorry, can you repeat your first question again?
The first part of it was some sanctions on Russian oil have been lifted. India, yes, asked the United States, "Hey, can we use Russian oil because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked?" What do you make of that development, and do you think Russian oil is going to be used more by more nations?
Well, I mean, this is the slightly ironic. I'll even say hypocritical issue that has arisen as intelligence has shown that Russia is sharing strategic staging bases that the U.S. is holding in the Middle East region with, and the location of those bases with the Iranian authorities, and Russia is continuing to support Iran and supplying it with munitions. At the same time, it's getting a waiver and sanctions lifted off of it to supply oil to partners like India. So whether this is a gesture of goodwill to India and other partners that the U.S. has recently concluded trade agreements with to keep them on side, it shows the trouble that the United States and the Trump administration is in at the moment, and the corner this is backing the Trump administration into by giving Russia some space to continue operating its oil sales to other countries, which it has tried to cut off with other measures. And as Russia feeds intelligence to Iran, which the U.S. has identified as the enemy. So there's quite a lot of hypocrisy there and irony in that decision.
Absolutely. In these kinds of conflicts, boots on the ground, you referenced it earlier, is another phase or stage of warfare. Do you see American or Israeli boots on the ground in Iran at some point?
I don't. I actually think that the United States, and I could be proven wrong because this is a strange world that we're living with at the moment. But at the end of the day, the United States nor Israel want this state-to-state war to continue. In fact, I think both countries suspected that they could finish the job much sooner and quicker than has been the case. I think now what we can expect is probably a ramping up in controlled warfare that continues to target the military infrastructure, degrading the launchers that are putting vessels in the Straits of Hormuz into jeopardy, but at the same time continue the diplomacy. And you could argue that that brings us to where we started with Steve Witkoff leading the diplomatic talks with Iran, together with Jared Kushner, making whatever progress they were making. But if we go right back to that position now, one could argue that those negotiations are undermined and are worse off because you now have a supreme leader in Iran whose father was killed by the U.S.-Israeli attacks, whose wife was killed by the U.S.-Israeli attacks, and who arguably has more of a motive now to continue enriching uranium, potentially to continue building a nuclear weapon, but certainly not ending this war through diplomatic talks without any hard asks on the table, such as reparation costs, the assurance that Iran's legitimate rights as a nation state will be guaranteed, and all sorts of things. And if they hold the Straits of Hormuz as hostage using munitions such as underwater mines, tugboat transported explosives, launch pads that continue to target ships, then they could keep this war going, even with a degraded capability, for some time.
Let's talk about the end of the war. And we don't know when this is going to occur, but what does a victory look like for the United States and Israel, and what does a win look like for Iran?
Well, Donald Trump is already claiming victory. Let's just make that clear, when victory hasn't been gained by any partner yet. Victory for Iran, I think, will look like a return back to the negotiating table and securing the leader that it has selected, Mojtaba Khomeini, the son of the former Supreme Allied Commander Ali Khomeini, and probably money for reparations of the Iranian infrastructure and the ports, claiming that those need to be rebuilt for the Straits of Hormuz to be operable again. But with the Quds Force, the prolific militia, and the Republican Guard still intact and operating business as usual. Arguably, an additional win for Iran will be the additional motive that has been realized with some of its proxy groups in Yemen and in Iraq and in Lebanon, Hezbollah. So a win for the U.S. would be to completely degrade any ability for Iran to develop a nuclear capability and a long-range missile capability that would threaten the United States, and regime change. But I don't see that regime change forthcoming. And I think the U.S., Israel would share similar views to the United States. It wants the regime eradicated, it wants the military capability degraded, and it wants to rid the region of the proxy groups. And Hezbollah has started firing again. Hezbollah's capacity in Lebanon was weakened over the last 6 months, and it went fairly quiet, relatively quiet. Now that Israel is launching again on Beirut and other targets in Lebanon, you see Hezbollah rising and possibly others having motive to consolidate with Hezbollah. So I think it's leaving the Middle East region in much worse conditions, just because of the will of those proxies to rise up again. There has to be an agreement. Russia called for an agreement in the UN Security Council, I think yesterday or the day before, calling for fighting to cease on both sides and for the parties to come to the negotiating table. I think 3 other countries, including Pakistan, Somalia, and China, supported that resolution. But of course, it wasn't accepted. And while the United States holds the chair of the Security Council, proposals like that will continue not to be accepted and taken forward. So the sad and unfortunate and very tragic thing for the Iranian people and for the people in the Middle East is that there is no clear end in sight at the moment. And other Middle Eastern allies are deeply affected. I mean, the United Arab Emirates has been hit by approximately 1,400 missiles that have been fired on it. And this is a big tourist destination hub. Many international communities reside in this part of the world. It's a very important transit place for airlines. We've seen Bahrain be hit, Saudi Arabia hit, and if the United States pulls out, it's that goodwill that has always been there with the alliance in the Middle East and alliance partners with the United States, which may be affected as well. The perception that the U.S. may leave them at a time when they've brought them into the conflict.
I found it fascinating that it was Russia at the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, who made the proposal to, come to a peaceful resolution where they're still invading Ukraine. What was in it for Russia to stop this war?
I mean, we've always seen Russia play different sides of the table simultaneously, and I think that's what's happening now. I think Russia knows that the United States knows that it has the ear of the regime in Iran, and that it's trying to exercise leverage that way, but that would never come without demands from Russia as well. So it just brings a new dynamic onto the chessboard that I don't think the U.S. is prepared to tolerate at the moment.
It's an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Your best guess on how much longer this lasts? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months?
I would see the conflict lasting weeks still. I hesitate to take a guess. I'd like to think there would be a sense of controlled military activity and strikes over the next week or so, whilst back-channel diplomacy continues. What President Trump cares deeply about are the markets, and he also has to care deeply about the U.S. economy. Even though strategic reserves have been unlocked, strategic oil reserves, we still see the price of a barrel of oil soaring this morning. So it will take time for the impact of the unlocking of the reserves to positively affect and ease the high price of oil at this moment. And consumers are the ones feeling it, along with the tariffs, along with the rise in unemployment rate, the lowering of job opportunities, and not a lot of movement with the United States on some of the reciprocal tariff commitments that countries agreed to. So, you know, there's a feeling that there's a lot of uncertainty and instability in the United States at the moment. And there is unease about the extent to which people are and allies are happy to enter into commitments with them. You're seeing this play out between entities like the European Union and the U.S. administration, Japan and the U.S. administration, Germany and the U.S. administration. And so it's a wait and see, but there is no incentive for Israel or the United States to continue this state-to-state war, or Iran to continue a state-to-state war for much longer.
This conflict might be happening halfway around the world, but its ripple effects are certainly being felt around the globe. Dr. Fitz-Gerald, thank you so much for your insight and analysis on the Newsmakers podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that is a wrap for Newsmakers. A big thank you to the all-star cast behind the scenes. If you liked today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.